Well, hello. Thank you for joining us for another Everyday Advocacy Teacher Story. I am really excited to have a guest with me today who I met just recently when we were both on a panel in St. Louis about book bans, in which we were in conversation with Amanda Jones, the author of That Librarian. So I'm here to introduce you to Tom Bober. Tom is an elementary school librarian. And I've been wanting to know more about his work as an advocate for diverse books ever since our experience on that panel. He told some powerful stories that I knew would be of interest to this audience. A little more background. Tom is immediate past president of the Missouri Association of School Librarians, and he has been the organization's contact with the ACLU of Missouri, which has brought litigation against SB 775, which is a state law that was passed 2 years ago that has led to a lot of book bans in our area. So thank you very much for being here today, Tom. I wanted to start by acknowledging that you've been very active in the book ban fight recently, but you have a broader view of the connection between advocacy and your work in the library that I think is important background here. So, what does advocacy look like for you when it comes to your work in an elementary school library?
So I think when we're looking at advocacy, I think for me at least, I put that side by side with marketing. Um, we advocate for the library. We let people know what the library stands for, what we offer, what we are, what we value, and what we find important. And those conversations happen on a lot of different levels. So those conversations happen with us, with colleagues in the classrooms and otherwise in the building. Those conversations happen with administration. Those conversations happen with parents. And of course, those conversations in different forms happen with students as well, because we want everyone to value the library. I mentioned, though, that that goes side by side for me with marketing, because the idea of marketing for me is a little bit different in the sense that I want to show you not just what we believe in through the advocacy side, but I also want to market to you so you come into the library and you make use of the space as well. You don't just value it for what it is, but you actually utilize the resources within it. And so we do deliberate marketing, of course, to students, right? You're doing book talks and showing students the layout of the library and getting them involved in that sense. But you're doing the same with your teachers. You're marketing the resources that we have, both instructionally and book resources and information literacy resources on all that with teachers. We do also marketing out to parents. I put on Zooms with my parents where we talk about um, different elements of what is important to the library, but things that the parents can then take and utilize in their parenting as being part of their child's reading life. So, for example, we did a session recently on how specifically parents can be more involved in very positive ways around their child's reading life, and did a quick little half-hour session. So that to me is much more marketing, but it goes side by side with the advocacy piece. I think that when we have patrons of the community as a wide view utilizing the library, I think it's much easier for them to then buy into the advocacy element that you're doing to promote the values of the library.
Mhm. I love that you led with the word values and what you value in the library. Has that conversation shifted, or have the talking points around what you value in the library shifted at all in this moment where libraries are under attack and book bans have been in the headlines?
I think they've just become more clear
Mm.
in how we articulate those things of as far as what we value and how we value that that our young readers are able to come into this space and see not only themselves on with the books on the shelves, but the wider world around them, and have a wide variety of information that is age appropriate and age relevant. So it's kind of forced us to really fine tune our messaging around that, but I don't know that it's necessarily changed. The collection is there and it's been there. I think what ends up changing the collection is when we see shifting needs from the students. And that's happened over the past 5 to 10 years. We've seen more of a focus in on stories around mental health and mental well-being. That's been a growth area. We've seen more stories at the elementary level that involved LGBTQ plus characters, both fiction and nonfiction in narrative form. And that's been asked for by students and thankfully is out there through the publishing world. So the collection has shifted based off demand, but the messaging has just been clarified because of everything that's kind of happening around us with regard to book challenges and legislation that's come out at the state level.
Hmm. So let's pivot to that state context. What did you experience on the ground when SB 775 was passed 2 years ago? And maybe tell our viewers what SB 775 is.
Sure. Yeah. So SB 775 is a broader piece of legislation, but there's a small element within it that looks at making illegal the distribution of what they describe as explicit sexual material of a visual form. So they give some guidelines on into what that is, but it is also in some ways open for interpretation and somewhat vague in nature, in my professional opinion. That came onto a lot of Missouri school librarians' radar in July a couple years ago, shortly after it was passed, and was going into effect in August. So there was a mad dash not only to understand the law itself, but to communicate and be part of the communication around that law at the school and the district level, as well as to review collections and see if there were any books that we felt were in violation of SB 775. And this is across the state. At the time, I was first vice president at Massel. And so there was a group of us that were working to not only come to those understandings ourselves, but also to try to help school librarians from across the state come to those understandings and see how that fit in with the values of the library. This really went beyond existing collection development pieces that we might have sitting in our schools and in our districts. And so we found across the state that certain schools in certain districts, my district being one of them, found books that we felt might be in violation of the law to the best of our understanding, but also fit within our circulate or within our collection development guidelines. And so that's a really strange place to be professionally when you know you're bringing in, again, I'm going to use that phrase, age relevant and age appropriate books for students. The books that we pulled off of our shelves in our district were at the high school level, but still we felt were likely in violation of this law based off of how it was written and our understanding of it.
So you did pull some books at the high school level.
In our district, we did pull some books at the high school level. We pulled, and I might be, let me try to remember them. We pulled Home After Dark. We pulled Handmaid's Tale, the graphic novel. Um, and there was one other that's escaping me right at the moment, but we did pull three of those books off of our shelves because we felt like the definition of explicit sexual material might be met by only one or two panels of the graphic novels with each of those particular books. So within the larger context, we felt like it was very appropriate, but looking at single panel by single panel, which is what we had to do with reviewing the collection, uh, at the high school level and various and all of our levels, we felt like those few books might be in violation.
Yeah. Like editorial comment. How did you feel about that? Like, I love that there's a Venn diagram, what the state is targeting and what your collection development policy supports as valuable and needed. There's an overlap there, and you have to decide whether to like stand in the line of fire or capitulate to the state. So talk more about that.
Well, so let me give a little more background on SB 775
Yeah,
because
yeah.
what it did was made the distribution or the even just making available these particular titles that may be in violation of the law illegal for the individual. So it wasn't that the district was going to be punished. It was that the individual, the librarian, the teacher with the classroom library, whatever it was, could be jailed and fined uh, with that particular, if found guilty of that. So that being the case, it really shifted the thinking, because at the time I was also district library coordinator, and I was working hand in hand with my high school librarian. And part of what I had to keep in mind, along with those two elements that you just mentioned, was what's the comfort level of my high school librarian? How willing is she to um, put herself out there legally? And where's her comfort level? And also, where's the comfort level of administration and other district individuals? There was a lot of deep conversation going on around that. How do I feel about pulling those three titles? Um, I was disappointed that
Hmm.
it had to happen. And that's putting it mildly, because I felt like in doing that, we were doing a disservice to the readers who might need those particular books.
Hmm.
We all know every school librarian has picked up a book and known the one reader that that particular book was meant for, right? That we've all had that experience. And these particular titles, I feel like, are probably no different for the high school librarian in our district. So to pull those off, I think we were doing a disservice. But I also think in the bigger picture, we were doing something that was appropriate, given the variety of issues at stake. And I also knew that that there was some likelihood at the time that the organization I'm a part of, the Missouri Association of School Librarians, was going to be involved in future litigation around SB 775 and challenging that legislation, and that is exactly what it ended up happening. So I felt like we were, in many ways, doing our due diligence on one front where we couldn't do it on another.
That's a really well articulated um, position. And it leads me into wanting to ask you about that litigation, but I want to stop and acknowledge there's this great set of four words that we use in everyday advocacy. The work needs to be smart, it needs to be safe, it needs to be savvy and sustainable. And so I really appreciate that those discussions about comfort level are entirely about people needing to feel safe in their jobs, making reasonable decisions given the consequences and conditions that they're working in. So I've learned from a library leader named Kelly Jensen, who writes for Book Riot, that litigation is in many ways that's the way to go. That's the place where perhaps the most effect can be had of, of fighting book bans. Like that's where the greatest returns can be. So tell me about this litigation experience and how you came to be the ACLU's point person in the school library community.
So at the time, again, I was still serving as that in that first vice president position. There was a small group of us that were having a lot of deep conversations around what was Masl's response to all of this. And again, our initial response was trying to keep people informed and aware, and know how they could advocate for their libraries and approach this in a responsible way. But it turned to, how can we address this particular law? And there was conversation around trying to do something at the legislative level, but we knew that given Missouri's legislative makeup, that really was not going to lead us anywhere that we wanted to go, especially in the short term. It was just not going to happen. And so litigation, really, for me, became the only possible way to really, um, in my mind at least, it was Mazel, this organization, doing what it should to serve the school librarians across the state. That this litigation could potentially do that by hopefully declaring this particular piece of SB 775 as unconstitutional. That there's First Amendment rights at stake here, and other issues at stake, and at the very, very least, to declare that this law was overly vague and needed much more definition, which we were hoping if that would happen, that we would at least get some kind of um, clarity around that, because what we saw across the state was that we had districts that were pulling dozens of books, we had districts that were pulling no books, and it wasn't due to collection, right? It was due to interpretation of the law, and that became the issue. So what we did was to start to have conversations with different law firms. And we ended up, I think our second or third conversation, we also had conversations uh, with library leaders at the national level. And we ended up having conversations with ACLU, and it really seemed like a really great fit. They wanted to approach this litigation in a way that we, as an organization, the organizational leaders really agreed with. And we were actually also able to bring in the Missouri Library Association because of their connections that their public school librarians have with school libraries as well, and the possibility of them being impacted by this law as well. So we were extremely glad to have them be part of this also, just having these two organizations that really do right by Missouri librarians as a whole as part of this. Um, the lawsuit has been filed, and currently we are in the discovery phase. So we're hoping by sometime in 2025 to have some movement and to see if hopefully that we get this ruled in our favor. And the hope then is that we can remove this, one element out of what's going on. I think one thing I want to add, if I could, is that as we decided to move into this litigation, another thing we talked about was other states dealing with similar legislation and kind of being a showing others what could be done. And because we were one of the first as an organization to move into this kind of litigation. And the other thing we talked about is the possibility that if we didn't move forward with some kind of with litigation, that the Missouri legislature might be emboldened to make other laws that would further restrict the types of stories and information that our students would have access to in our school libraries and in our schools.
Have not made other laws building on SB 775, correct?
Correct. There have been conversations at the state level, and some lawmakers have made proposals, but nothing's moved forward in any way that at this point that would get towards actually peace coming into law.
Yeah. I really appreciate what you said about thinking about other states who are in parallel circumstances and being a model for them, being in connection with them. That connects to this notion that nobody can do hard political advocacy work alone. It's more powerful when it's in community. That's part of what makes it sustainable. So, can you speak any more about how you've sustained yourself in the work and any advice you have for other people who are concerned about their school library collections or perhaps even their classroom library collections?
I think for me personally, the first thing I had to do is really make the decision about how much I was willing to put myself out there regarding SB 775. I've done a fair amount of press. I've received some anonymous hate mail online. And so knowing that that was a possibility was the first thing. I also knew that I have certain privileges in this particular role. I'm in a district that is supportive of this work. Um, to be just quite frank, I'm a white straight male. My children are out of state, and so I have a lot of things that people other librarians may worry about as things that they don't the reasons they might not want to put themselves out there. I didn't have some of those limitations, and so I thought, well, if I can't do this, I'm not really sure, the people that can. Um, so that was the first thing I had to do. And I think that it's perfectly acceptable that certain people are going to make decisions that they can't put themselves out there as much, or in certain ways because it doesn't feel safe to them. Uh,
Mhm.
and I want to acknowledge that 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 is going to happen across the board, and that is perfectly okay. I think we all find the ways that we can support our students as readers and support them having access. That looks different for every librarian. Um, I also make decisions about how much I do with regard to speaking around SB 775 and how much I don't do. And as I've moved through my presidency year into my, and now into my immediate past president, this is just something that I personally want to see through, um, to hopefully what I'm hoping will be the end of it in a positive form. Um, but as far as just taking care of myself, I think we take care of ourselves in the way that we always do, and that is to make decisions about what we can lean into and what we can't lean into. And then another way that is what I mentioned earlier. I think that marketing and that connecting with the community and with families is another way that that bolsters me because it makes me feel um, safe and accepted in my professional workplace.
Mhm,
And I think that's a huge value to me.
mhm. So valuable. I really appreciate your story, your advice, your leadership. It's been a privilege to get to know you even in these brief moments, and I will be extra acute as a reader of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch to see how this lawsuit proceeds and hope our paths cross again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to share.
Oh, thank you, Tom. All right, best of luck to you.